Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Yuri Takhteyev, and I am with Wrangle.io. And here with me is Igor Krivanov. He is also from Wrangle.io. And we're going to be talking about debugging Angular 2 apps with Batarangle. And at this point, you might be thinking, Bata what? So let me give you just a little bit of a background for this project and also an outline for our talk. So this started around August when we got a Twitter message from Brad Green. And as we followed up on this, it turned out that the Angular team was looking for partners to work on tools, right? So the idea that they wanted to find someone who would really kind of take on and maintain focus on Angular tools so that they do not need to kind of focus on that themselves. Now, obviously, in Angular 1, there is Batarang. So we started looking at how to bring some of the same features to Angular 2. And also, of course, since the needs of the project of Angular 2 applications are a little different, we also looked a little wider. We looked at developer tools for Chrome and developer tools for React and also for several other projects. So we built together a team, and Igor has been one of the people leading that. There's also several people who have been really helping us back in Toronto, including actually hacking hardcore over the last couple of days to just make sure that we can actually have a good demo here. So I want to say thanks to them. And then we spent a bit of time thinking about name, and we didn't come up with a good name, so we just went with what was our code name, which is Batarangle, because we are Wrangle.io, and Batarangle was just too good to pass up. So what we want to do, so today, what we've done over the last couple of months, right? I mean, unfortunately, our team has been working on other things in parallel. But what we've done is we've built a foundation we feel a good foundation for Angular 2 tools for Google Chrome. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick demo of what we've built so far. And afterwards, we'll talk a little bit about our future plans, both things that we want to build in a really short term, or that are almost done that we're just not quite ready to demo, and also some tools that we are going to be doing a little bit later down the line. But it's also, we feel that we really want this to be a community project that's really driven by needs of actual developers. And so from that perspective, we're actually leaving the question of what future features are going to be really open, and we're looking for community input, both in terms of ideas, but ideally also in the form of code requests. So in order to facilitate that, we're going to spend a little bit of time kind of looking under the hood and telling you about how those tools work, so that to kind of take out the mystery out of it, so that you actually would be ready if you really look at what we've built so far and thinking like, well, this is kind of a good start, but you want something different, you'll be in a good position to actually go ahead and start hacking on it. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about what tangibly can you actually do to get involved in a short term. So our first step now is do a quick demo of what we've got so far. So I'll hand off to Igor.
So like Yuri said, basically we spent a few weeks looking at this and trying to figure out how we can debug Angular 2 application and what's available to us. And I actually think that Angular 2 is really good in that regard, better than Angular 1, because it provides a lot of facilities out of the box already, which we could use. And I'm going to start with a little feature that we've kind of implemented originally. So we have this little to-do MVC app, and it's packaged together with this repo, so you can go ahead and use it. And one of the first things that we've created is something that we call a component inspector. So you can open this tab, and you can select an Angular component, and it will give you some information, and it will also put it on the console for you. So you can do $A, and you can get a debug element. You might have attended the talk about unit testing, and actually, it seems that they were using the same object there as well. So maybe that's the original intent behind this. But you can get a lot of stuff about your specific component this way. Specifically, you can get component to instance, and you can see, so this is a to-do list component. You can see what's inside, so you can see we have a to-do store. But this is really simple, this is really basic, and I think the goal for the future is actually to take that out. But for now, we're actually using it to debug our whole extension. And that's what I'm going to show you. So actually, pretty much the component inspector is what we had up until more or less a week ago, just a little bit more. So we kind of hacked on and looked into other approaches and so on. And we created this view that you see here. Actually, let me do this. As you see, we're still putting some debugging information on the console. And what we thought of is that we want to see a tree of components. So as you might know, Angular 2 is all about components and representing them as a component tree. And we want to have some kind of a visual representation for it. And right now it doesn't show much because, well, we don't have much entered in our to-do list. But you can already gauge some information. So if you click ngIf and you go to state, you can see the condition is false, for example, and things like that. But now, if we add another to-do, you get a little bit more. So one thing that kind of became apparent to us, and we were discovering this as we were working on this, is, for example, that ng4 is a sibling of all the stuff that it generates. It's not. You would expect it, I guess, to be contained within it, but it seems to be more of a sibling kind of relationship. So that's one of the first things we discovered while working on this. But if you look at the state, you can see actually the items, the array that's being used to actually iterate over ng4. You can also click on the specific component itself, and you can see that we have a few things here. So one is the to-do store, which is being dependency injected. So you can kind of go and inspect that. This is immutable GS, so the structure here is a little bit funky. You can also see that the to-do item, which is kind of a subcomponent, contains a lot of other things within it that kind of do not show. So like there's this ngIf, for which the condition is false, and so on. There is a button, there is a label. And what you can also do before I actually get to ngIf, if you go to the to-do item, and we can actually inspect it. And let's say we want to complete this item, which is represented by this instance variable of this to-do object. So here I'm going completing this. And if I click on this again and inspect this, I can see the completed has been changed to true. I can take it even a step further. I can go into to-do store, look at my to-dos, and kind of make sure that my store has been updated as well, without putting any debugging breakpoints or anything like that. And go inside, and now you see the completed has been set to true. The same thing kind of goes if you go and you change the text here. And as you can see there, if you click the ngIf right now, oh, no. And inspected state, you see that the condition has been set to true. So you can kind of deduce that ngIf controls the display of the input element here. But I'm going to do the same thing. And again, you can go and inspect the state of your component. And you see that the title has been changed. We also get notified about updates. So let's say you're going to add another task to the list. You'll see that this view has changed, and now we have more things. And the same kind of goes to remove this. And so on and so forth. So this is essentially what we have so far for this in terms of the demo. And I think I'm going to get back to the presentation.
So we want to talk a little bit about future plans, and some of those are short-term plans. So first, Richie, you want to continue this?
Sure. So actually, the way it's been implemented is, like I mentioned, we're using the debug element that Angular team has kindly provided to us. And again, it kind of shows the direction they were going with this. I think I would deduce from that that they've kind of tried to make the framework contain all this information for us, which makes it a lot easier for us to get. But what we do right now, I showed you our to-do MVC, and you probably want to use it on other applications and so on, and you might think how. And right now, you can't necessarily use it out of the box,
but you do need to make a small modification to your app. It's 2 lines of code, and you can check in the repo how to do that. So one of the first things that we're going to do is probably communicate with the Angular team and try to push that bootstrap logic or work with them and see how we can get that done without having to modify the application. So that's one of our plans. Yeah, and we also need to wrap up our tree view and the component inspector and to make it better. What I showed you now is developer preview. So it's kind of alpha stage at this point. And we want to bring it to a better state and to be more finished, I guess, and polished and so on.
And in particular, integrated with the rest of DevTools so that we actually could have, so that when you select items, you also have the corresponding element selected. But when you do inspect element in one pane, in your application, you will see it selected in the component tree.
Yeah, and the same kind of translates to $A as well. So if you select a component in the tree, I can go and kind of see it on the console. So I think that's what we
I guess I just jumped ahead. So the other thing, so this is the kind of the immediate things that we actually are hoping to wrap up really soon. Now, there's a few other features that are also actually close to being done that we really are. Now, so what we started with is these sort of features that are fairly similar to what a lot of similar tools are offering. And this is, we feel it's a somewhat better display, for instance, than what React tools offer you for their navigation of the component tree. But it's, in a certain sense, it's the same thing. Now, what we want to do next is to do a few things that actually we feel would be a little different and more Angular specific. And one of them is showing updates. Now, you probably remember this, the talk by Victor Safkin from ngConf, where he shows that how the different update scenarios in Angular. So depending on what ways do you use to bind your components? I mean, do you use immutables, or whether you sort of do it as one-way binding and those kind of things? How different parts of your application will get updated when there is a change. So what we want to do is to actually do the same thing, but in real time, right? So, and this information is actually available from Angular, and it's really, at this point, we are already marshalling it in. We just need to actually finish it up on the front end, where basically the idea is that as you move through your application, as you navigate your application, you sort of change things, you will actually see which components got updated. And so you can actually then debug performance by noticing that things get updated that probably shouldn't be updated at that point. Now, the other item that we want to add very soon that's almost there is snapshots. So the idea is that right now, as you saw, that every time that you actually make a change to the application, the component inspector panel, or sort of the tree view and the corresponding sort of data display gets updated. Now, we really, at that point, get the representation of the internal state of the application in essentially marshaled to us as JSON strings. So we actually have the opportunity to save them and to allow you to basically travel back in time in your tool. So you could basically go back and say, well, I just clicked on this button. Here's what my state became now. But we can actually offer you a way of going back and seeing what your state was just before you clicked that button. So the idea is that you would actually, and we're hoping to get that wrapped up very soon. Now, further down the line, though, I mean, we have some ideas, but we really want to open this up to the community and sort of ask what features do you feel, beyond those basics, what features do you feel would be most useful? Now, it's somewhat limited naturally by what is available from Angular 2 in terms of instrumentation. I mean, as Igor mentioned, the great thing about Angular 2 is that it does actually provide a lot of instrumentation support. And we've basically set up a foundation where you can have access to most of that stuff now inside of the tool. Some of the features that people may want, we may need to kind of go back to Angular team and really sort of get more assistance in terms of getting them instrumented. But we really want to open it up to the community and sort of ask, what are the features that you would want? I mean, either in form of ideas or in form of pull requests. So in order to facilitate that, we want to talk a little bit about how those tools work under the hood. So I'll hand it back to Igor.
Yeah. So the way it's essentially implemented at the beginning, it's very similar to how a lot of other dev tools work. But the cool thing about this is that the tree view that you see is actually an Angular 2 application written in TypeScript. So technically, you can take all of your Angular 2 knowledge and contribute and relatively easily. Now, what we've done, that's just the view. And again, it was inspired in a way by Victor Safkin's talk, where we're looking for ways to represent this tree. And I think we're still working on that. But the Angular 2 instrumentation is kind of a bit of us kind of trying to hack around the DOM. So essentially what we're doing is we're using one of the functions that's packaged with Angular. It's called inspect native element, if you haven't been following the commits and so on. And what we're doing is we literally are listening to DOM changes within the context of the inspected application. And whenever those changes occur, we get that element, and essentially we invoke an Angular 2 function to get back the debug element object. And then we store it in our own representation of the Angular 2 tree and send it back to display within the view itself. So and the way that's achieved is something that's called an inject script. It has to do with the way DevTools work in Chrome and probably the same in other browsers. But your DevTools view lives in a different context than your application. And the only way to communicate between them is by sending messages. But at the end of the day, what we have to do is to inject our own script into the inspected application that lives within the same context, has the same access to the same DOM and the same window. And that's how we achieve the DOM observation and also being able to call Angular 2's function to get the objects back that's represented. And the communication between the view and the inspected application is achieved using a kind of a post message API. This is kind of a Chrome extension API, and we kind of set that up. And it's not necessarily rocket science or anything like that, but there is a lot of finicky stuff that needs to be done there in terms of injecting the script and setting up this bidirectional communication between the view and the inspected app. But we've kind of done that. I think that part is pretty much finalized. And if you want to contribute and you don't want to deal with that part, even though you can essentially deal with the service. We have a store. We have a Flux-like architecture on the view end of things. And if you don't want to deal with that, you don't have to. You can just, again, work with the service and just get the data that we send. But if you're interested, that's how it communicates. Yeah, and again, the post message is kind of tied together with the Google Chrome DevTools API. We use that to create the view, to load up our Angular 2 application, and so on. Yeah.
So and one thing that I wanted to just reiterate that, well, there's actually two things. So first of all, when we were going into it, we really expected the Chrome DevTool sort of setup to be a bit more complicated than it really is, right? So it really is simple, right? So in terms of the way those things actually are integrated, in terms of like what it takes to actually build a Chrome application is really quite simple. So I mean, at the end of the day, you just need to go to the GitHub repo, you clone it, you run npm install, you run gulp build, and you go to Chrome and you add an extension, and you just, instead of downloading extension, you point to a folder in your computer, and boom, that you've got your extension, right? So that's one piece. And then the communication channel and sort of linking with Angular instrumentation, that was a little bit tricky, but a lot of that got done. So a lot of the features that I think people may want to add next are really at this point a matter of working with the Angular 2 application that runs inside Google Chrome, right? And as Igor mentioned, we provide already a lot of the information through a service. So really, if you want to get started on this, it actually probably would be a lot easier than you imagine. And you could go ahead and modify those tools to your heart's content. This was my installing from source party. So now let's talk a little bit just about what can you actually do next. So first of all, I want to point you to the GitHub repository. So it's github.com/wrangle/Batarangle. Again, so there's two things there. There is the actual Chrome extension. So again, you just run npm install, you run gulp build, you point Chrome to use that folder as the extension, and that's it, right? And you've got a new extension. That's the entire installation process for Batarangle. And then if later you want to sync to the latest changes, you fetch, you merge, you rerun npm install and gulp build, and you don't actually need to touch Chrome again. It just updates. And then there is also inside there is a sample application. Now, the sample application, obviously, you probably would want to actually use your own eventually, but this is to get started. Now, when you go to the repo, what we also have there is an invitation to join our Slack team. So we have a Slack team for Batarangle. So if you want to try it out and then you get stuck, or if you want to contribute and you want to talk to us, then there's a form there that you can fill in, and we'll add you right away to our Slack team. And then this is going to be the best way to talk to us, and both for getting support and for actually discussing ideas. And then if you were just sort of saying, well, you're thinking like, well, you don't really want to be hacking it now. You want to actually hear about it when we get the version released. The first version released. So right now, we're thinking of trying to align it with the release of Angular Beta. Now, the reason for this is because there is a lot of change still in Angular code base, and what we've been finding is that it's like day by day, we need to actually change Batarangle code to actually kind of adjust for the fact that there's a new version that the Angular changes from one day to another. So from that perspective, us putting an extension in the Chrome store probably would be a little premature. But we're hoping that by the time Angular 2 Beta is out, we'll actually have an extension in the Chrome store. So if you want to just hear about updates, then go to wrangle.io/Batarangle, and we have a sign-up form, and you can sign up, and you'll hear updates about Batarangle.
And like Yuri mentioned, I think one of the things that is important to us is I think we want that to be a community-driven tool. We looked at Batarang, we looked at React Dev Tools and Ember Inspector, and we were inspired by what those guys did. And there is a lot of opportunity for everyone to kind of join and change things to fit more what you want. Like, for example, we don't like the view that we kind of hacked on currently. You can go ahead and change that really, really easily. And I think that's the intent. And as a result, we also try to provide documentation within the repo so that everyone can jump on board, everyone can see what the build steps are, and so on. And we're going to only extend that in the future so as to make sure everyone's contributions are easily added to this tool.
And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. So any questions? Yeah?
Is Batarangle solely for web extensions, or could it be integrated with tools like Batarang.js for remote debugging?
So we have focused just on the Chrome extension at the moment.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yes, sorry. The question was, is it just for Google Chrome, or will it work with other tools potentially? And so we have, for now, just focused on Google Chrome. And for foreseeable future, that's probably going to be our own focus. But a lot of this is, and so I think that if we, in order to link it with something else, there's parts of the communication layer that will need to be rewritten, right? But I think the good news is that most of the code is not Chrome specific. It really is an Angular application. It's an Angular application running inside like one of the panes inside Google Chrome. So as long as an alternative communication layer is provided for whichever tools you want to integrate it, and as long as those tools are capable of actually displaying a JavaScript application, then it should really be not that difficult to adapt it. Yeah?
Yeah, I have a question. So using Angular 1 Plus and the Batarang also, mostly you have the scenes panel, and it's like validating your Angular code based on jump up a style guide or some kind of stuff. Do you actually plan to put that people integrate their own style guides so that it works based on that? Or?
What do you mean?
So you integrate your own style guide or some open source style guide to it, so the hinting works not on one specific style guide, but because you have hints here, bound to one style guide.
Well, so the question is about style guides and hinting. So in our case right now, the way the tool works, it actually doesn't look at your source code at all, right? It really, we look at the level of Angular instrumentation sort of from the DOM, right? So when DOM updates, we get the corresponding element information, and then we display that, right? So in that sense, right now there is no integration with source code, so there's no connection with style guide.
But if I may add quickly, so I think also there is other potential there for things like ng-hint, for example, which has been taken out of Batarangle as kind of its own project. And what we're looking for is actually integrating with that as well. So you might get some of that functionality eventually in there.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.